There are books upon books upon books of illustrations for preachers, indexed. You can just flip through there and find an illustration that pertains to your particular subject, and you can just plug it into your sermon. Now, that was back when we bought books. Now, you can go on the internet, and there are services, and I subscribe to one of them through Preaching Today, and you can just type in your keyword, it populates with all these stories. And there was a time when I thought if it's in a book for preachers, it has to be the truth. I discovered that some really good illustrations weren't true. They were great stories, but they just weren't true. And that was kind of a disappointment, because it's a shame when the truth gets in the way of some good preaching. You know, it just kind of messes up some stuff. Anyway, I tell you that to tell you that in Kent Hughes' commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, he quoted a story by John Claypool. John Claypool was a great preacher from another generation, great respect for who he is and what he did in that generation. And the story it was so good, in my opinion, and so illustrative of where we're going tonight with this sermon. And I felt like it was so true that it's worth using. So you can Google it, you can check it out, you can come back in a few weeks and say, Brother Clint, you know that wasn't the truth. Don't do that. Just accept it as a really good illustration of a lack of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'm going to stick pretty close to the story because I don't want to mess it up tonight. But years ago, a small town merchant had identical twin sons who were inseparable. They were so close that they dressed alike all the way through their growing up years. And it was said that their extraordinary closeness was the reason they never married. So you got these bachelor twin brothers who are sons of this small town merchant. When their dad died, the two boys took over the family business. Their relationship, judged by all who looked at it, was considered a model of creative collaboration. Because he was busy, one of the brothers neglected to ring up a sale and absent-mindedly left a dollar bill on top of the cash register while he went to the front of the store to wait on another customer. Remembering the dollar, he returned to deposit it only to find that the bill was gone. He asked his brother if he'd seen it, but the brother said he had not. Here's the twist in the story. An hour later, he asked his brother again, but this time with an obvious note of suspicion. Did you see the dollar? His brother became angry and defensive, of course. And every time they tried to discuss the matter, the conflict grew worse, culminating in vicious charges and countercharges. The incredible outcome was the dissolution of their partnership, the installation of a partition right down the middle of the store, and now we had two competing businesses. One brother on one side, one brother on the other. This continued for 20 years, an open, divisive sore in the community. One day, a car with an out-of-state license pulled up in front of the stores. A well-dressed man entered one brother's shop and asked how long the store had been there. Learning it had been 20 years, he said, "Then you're the one. I need to settle an old score. 20 years ago, I was out of work, drifting from place to place, and I happened to get off a boxcar in your town. I had absolutely no money and had not eaten for 3 days. As I was walking down the alley behind your store, I looked in and saw a dollar bill on top of the cash register. Everybody else was in the front of the store. I'd been raised in a Christian home, and I'd never before in all my life stolen anything, but that morning I was so hungry, I gave in to the temptation, slipped through the door, and took that dollar bill. And that act has weighed on my conscience ever since. I finally decided that I would never be at peace until I came back and faced up to that old sin and made amends. Would you let me now replace that money and pay you whatever is appropriate for damages?" When the stranger finished his confession, he was amazed to see the old store owner shaking his head in deep sorrow and began to weep. Finally, the old man gained control and, taking the gentleman by the arm, asked him to go to the store next door and tell its owner the same story. The stranger complied, only this time 2 old men who looked almost identical wept side by side. $1. From our distance, Hughes continued, we can't say whether the two brothers professed to be believers or were even churchgoers. Given the time and the culture, they probably owned some religious inclinations. Indeed, they could have been enthusiastic churchmen, even evangelicals. But whatever their spiritual profession, their merciless, unforgiving spirits revealed hearts that had never understood the mercy of God. For if they had, they themselves would have been merciful. Jesus, continuing that story, that composite description of who we are to be as we walk with Him, that picture of those character traits that ought to be a part of us growing out of our relationship with Jesus Christ, continues in verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. There's a subtle turn in the sermon at this point. Prior to this, he has primarily been talking about our relationship with God the Father through Christ. He's been talking about our attitude as we see ourselves before Him. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the gentle. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. All of those demonstrate an attitude toward, a spirit toward God the Father as conditioned by our relationship with Jesus Christ. But now it's going to turn. And he's going to begin to talk about our relationship with one another. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So I ask of myself 3 questions. First, what is mercy? In his commentary on Matthew, Linsky makes the distinction between mercy and grace. He said, this then is not mere natural mercy as it is occasionally found among men generally, but the mercy growing out of our personal experience of the mercy of God. Remember, we've talked about this in regard to all these traits. They're not just natural inclinations that we refine to become more like this, better at this. These are those character traits that grow out of our experience of grace and our relationship with Jesus Christ. They are grace gifts, if you will. They are fruits of the Spirit of the Lord who is within us. And so it isn't just a natural thing, although folks who are lost can be merciful. You've seen it, and maybe you've experienced it. That they can feel pity towards somebody or something, and maybe they can be a part of a benevolent effort of raising money for somebody whose house burned or somebody who lost their job. Folks outside of Christ can be merciful. But for those of us who are in Christ, this mercy comes out of our experience of both grace and mercy in Christ. God's mercy toward us always makes us likewise merciful. And I thought that was a strong word. I had to stop with that one for a few minutes. God's mercy toward us always makes us likewise merciful. The noun, and he uses the Greek term, and its derivatives always deal with what we see of pain, misery, and distress, these results of sin. And grace always deals with the sin and guilt itself. The one extends relief. Mercy extends relief. The other, grace, extends pardon. The one cures, heals, helps, mercy. The other cleanses and reinstates, grace. With God, grace always comes first, and then mercy comes second. So it is that derivative of our experience of grace and God's extension of mercy toward us. He had pity on us. And aren't you glad He did? He pitied us and the shape that we were in and acted on that pity, extended His mercy toward us. Mercy is not just being easygoing. Oh, we'll have a little mercy here. The mercy rule. I always liked that when I was playing sports. You know, you get so many points behind and it's getting embarrassing. They employed the mercy rule. We're going to stop the game. There were games when I prayed for that. I prayed that the coaches would get together during a timeout and say, you know, this is getting out of hand. This is embarrassing to your team. Why don't we just stop it now? Let's all shake hands and go home. But no, they had to play the whole frazzling game. Mercy rules. This isn't that. This isn't just, well, let's just live and let live. Let's just let it go. Let's extend mercy. No, it's a sense of pity with a desire to do something about the suffering, to relieve the suffering. What is mercy? There are many biblical illustrations, but perhaps the best one that I I could find that I thought fits the description absolutely perfectly is in the parable of the Good Samaritan. There were two very religious people who came by, and perhaps they were moved a bit. They might have said, "Oh, poor fellow. Oh, my goodness. Bless his heart. You've done that. I've done that." That's what we say when we don't want to do anything. Well, bless his heart. And perhaps they did and kept going. But the Samaritan came along, and he looked, and he saw a man who had been beaten, a man who had been robbed and left for dead in the ditch. And he felt pity. There was there an emotion, and oh, no, oh, my. But then it drove him to stop and to get involved. Did he get blood on his hands? I suspect that he did. Did it cost him? We know it did, because we read the parable and see what the cost was of him, one, taking care of him there on the spot, doing triage in the ditch, and then taking him to the inn where he gave him a place to stay until he had recovered. Costly. Moved with compassion, moved with pity, and then getting involved. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Well, that implies a connection then between being and receiving. And so the second question is, what is that connection between being merciful and receiving mercy? We can go back to that same principle that exists when we read the passage where Jesus said more than once, if you're not willing to be a forgiving person, then you're not going to be able to receive forgiveness. And if we're literalists in a limited context, and we just take that verse out of context and say, oh, that's what that means, it would be that we would interpret that to mean that to the degree that I am nice to somebody or extend mercy to somebody, I'm going to get that back. What goes around comes around? Karma? This isn't karma. This isn't just getting what you give. It is that statement that there should be something in us that has changed us and the way we see ourselves and the way that we see others. If this is simply an expression of a quid pro quo relationship, if that's the principle, then we have canceled the doctrine of grace, unmerited favor. No, this is what you have put in the machine. It's what you get out. You put your coins in, you pull the plug, and you get whatever commodity inside there that you have put the money in for. Jesus demonstrated mercy on the cross. I had to think about this one a little bit. Yeah, he did. He is nailed on a crude wooden crosspiece between two common criminals. Those who have nailed him and those who are responsible for his situation are at his feet. There are lots of things he could have done and lots of things he could have said in that moment. But Luke records for us in Luke chapter 23, verse 34, Jesus was saying, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And they cast lots, dividing up his garments among themselves. A little later in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, Saul of Tarsus is standing holding coats while a group of people are stoning a man who they hated because of his faith. The man's name was Stephen, and they were intent on taking his life. And in Acts chapter 7, verse 59 and 60, the scripture says, they went on stoning Stephen as he called on the Lord, and he said, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then falling on his knees as he was dying, falling on his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." Having said this, he fell asleep, Luke using the euphemism of sleep for death. It'd be tough to do. A group of people gathered up around you throwing rocks at you. I've never had that happen. You? A group of reprobates taking your life? It would be very difficult to say, "Now, Father, please, don't hold this against them." Mercy, mercy. Joseph demonstrated mercy toward his brothers. We've just started over reading through the Bible, 1st of September, and I love the Joseph story. I love the Israel story. I love the whole thing. I'm amazed at how God did such a grand thing with some really messed up people. I would love to have in the foundational stories of the patriarchs of our faith, Judeo-Christian values. I'd love to have some exemplary stories of men of faith who always did the right thing, who honored God, who never colored outside the lines. But I'm going to tell you what, my head starts spinning just trying to keep up with the women that these guys had babies by. And why they did. And God worked in the midst of that brokenness. And that baby boy, Joseph, his daddy's favorite. Any of you in here, were you the favorite? The favored child? The one that got pampered, spoiled, rotten, and you're still that way? No, you're not going to raise your hand. You're just going to sit there like a tree full of owls. Well, he was. And you know, his daddy had made for him that coat of many colors, and he's got all those older brothers, and they hated his guts. And they finally got their opportunity. He comes out there to bring them a little snack. He comes from home. He's all bright and cheery and full of vim, vigor, and vitality. Bros, how y'all doing? Good to see you. I bring greetings from home. And they grab him and throw him in a hole in the ground. And then they sit around the fire. I got to believe that the hole in the ground, the fire was pretty close. He could hear every word they're saying. He's got some of his brothers who are saying, let's just kill him. I mean, y'all know he's been a pain in our neck our whole life. Daddy has always favored him. He's going to get, probably when the will is read, he's probably going to get a majority of the estate. But if we'll kill him, we'll get his share divided among the rest of us. Let's just kill him. Well, about that time comes that bunch of slave traders by, and a benevolent one in the group says, well, let's not kill him. Let's just sell him, and we can all split up the money. Well, okay. And he ends up in Egypt. It's a great story. Twists and turns, romance, broken hearts, mystery. And he ends up in the most influential position in Egypt during 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And guess who ran out of food in the meantime? His family. So his brothers make the trek. I love that part of the story where they didn't recognize him. He changed, grown up, I don't know, maybe fattened up a little bit, maybe had a beard and they didn't recognize him without being clean shaved. I don't know, but they didn't recognize him. He recognized them, and the intrigue was on, and he could have cleaned their clock. He could have spoken to the Pharaoh, and I believe if he'd wanted to, he could have had Pharaoh's soldiers come in and decapitate every one of them on the spot and said, you had that coming. I remember everything y'all said when I was in that hole. Remember how y'all used to taunt me and make fun of me? Do you remember how you said that day you wanted to kill me? Do you remember that? Off with their heads. Instead, he took care of them. And I love this word. It's kind of a final word on the whole proceedings as it's all coming out and they're recognizing him and everybody's getting back together. And he says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive. Mercy, a living example of compassion in action, taking care of his brothers, his father, and their families. I have to believe that in Joseph's understanding of how things worked, even though that was a twisted story and a difficult experience, God used that to get him from to. And God blessed him greatly in the meantime. Oh, there was the whole Potiphar's wife experience, and there was the time in jail. It wasn't pleasant, and he wouldn't have said any of that was good, but he recognized that it was all a part of the pilgrimage to get him where he needed to be, and he sensed, I believe, God being merciful to him in all of that. And because he had experienced mercy, he felt compelled to extend mercy. There really wasn't, it seems to me in his mind, there never was another choice. There never was a thought of decapitating them, of taking care of them. It was that he wanted to bless them. And so he did. And so he did faithfully. What is the blessedness of being merciful? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Those who express mercy, who extend mercy, will receive it. In order to extend mercy, to have that sense of pity, that awareness of suffering around us, of a difficult situation around us, there's got to be some kind of internal sensor, internal radar that allows us to pick up on that. There may not be a flashing red light. There may not be a horn honking saying, don't miss this. There may not be one of those big blow-up gorillas out in the front yard that catches our attention as we're driving by. But something within us, because of Jesus, will say, slow down. Listen. Pay attention. Pay attention. And then as we see and understand, we are prompted, motivated to expend, to expend mercy. To extend that, to be able to give it, we must have experienced the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. It is that when we've experienced the saving grace of Christ and His unlimited mercy that we are equipped to extend mercy. Hughes made a statement at this point in his commentary, and I backed off, and then I rolled back to my keyboard, and I backed off, and I rolled back to my keyboard. And I'm about to tell you what Kent Hughes said, and then I'm going to tell you what I think about that. Okay? He said, the ability to and the willingness to extend mercy is an indication of one's relationship with Jesus Christ. An inability to be merciful is indicative of the absence of a relationship with Jesus Christ. You know, we don't do a lot of judging around here. We don't do a lot of pointing fingers and saying, well, you can't be saved because honestly, only the Lord knows our hearts. Now, I want to think you're here on Sunday night, and just the way we roll, I'd like to think if you showed up on Sunday night at 6 o'clock, you got to be saved. I mean, what lost person wants to come to church on Sunday night at 6 o'clock? But it's entirely possible. If we do not feel that pity, if we can be so blinded by our own lives, so self-centered that we can just roll quietly and quickly by those who are suffering without any reaction at all, without any sense of, oh my. Hughes questioned our salvation. He went a step further, and this is where it got really, really interesting for me. The double first cousin of mercy is forgiveness. And the ability to forgive is an expression of our changed heart through Christ. Again, he said, as Christians, when we are unwilling and say we are unable to forgive, to extend mercy through the act of forgiveness, we are revealing the fact that Christ is absent from our spirit. I hesitated to say that because I thought somebody in here is going to come unhinged, may go home mad, may say, Clint, you don't understand. I tried to find a way to soften it. There was no way to soften it. I began to pick it apart. Blessed are the merciful. Fulfilled are the merciful. Happy are the merciful. Blessed of God are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I thought about it. When we are that person who is unable and unwilling to extend mercy, and we are all wound up in ourselves, consequently unable to forgive, then we're carrying around a lot of stuff. We're carrying around a lot of baggage. If you've got that laundry list, if I've got that laundry list of people in my life that I am unwilling to forgive, I will not extend mercy to. They've crossed the line. They've done the unforgivable sin in my estimation of sins. They've gone over the line, and I just can't. I will not. I'll be nice to somebody else. I mean, if there's somebody in church that house burns down, or there's some hungry child that needs some food, if there's some little child who doesn't have a coat in the wintertime, I'll give money. I'll step up and I'll contribute to that. But I cannot forgive. You may know well the energy that you have to expend and the heaviness of spirit that you take on when you are unwilling to forgive and you carry around that vindictiveness, that bitterness, and that anger for an extended period of time. You see, you got to keep up with it. You got to nurture it. I mean, you got to make sure it's watered and fertilized. It gets plenty of light. And you're perfectly willing to do that. You bring it up every now and then. You dredge up the story, the memory, the experience. Well, you remember what happened? Do you remember what they did? Do you remember what they said? And we relive it all over again. And we're back 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. We are those two brothers who are working every day, separated by a partition, who cannot stand the sight of each other because of $1. No, it wasn't because of the dollar. It was because they were so mean-spirited and judgmental toward one another, and they couldn't let it go. Boy, it takes a lot. I suspect those two brothers aged tremendously just from wagging that around. So if you can unburden yourself, if you can empty those bags, stand up straight, breathe deeply, smile, let it go. You haven't given them permission to hurt you. You haven't given them permission to be evil people. You've just said, I want to forgive you. And oh, by the way, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're where you are. I'm sorry that you're in the shape that you're in, and I want to do something. I want to help you. I think the day gets a little brighter. I think we can stand up a little straighter again and find a little bit more pep in our step because we're not having to remember over and over and over again. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So open up the bag. Examine its contents. What are you dragging around? And whose name is attached to it? Think about that last time you walked by, drove by, heard of that situation that in retrospect should have prompted some pity, but didn't. Whew. Where are you? Where are you?